Welcome to Bravo's The Podcast, where we dive into the heart of employee and customer engagement. I'm Sejean, and at the Bravos, we are building a global community to tackle the challenges of engagement and inspire real change in workplaces. Each episode, we give the floor to experts and passionate professionals who share key insights and personal stories to help you enhance your work environment. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, get ready for some enlightening conversations. Welcome aboard. Peter Vermeulen. Vermeulen. I'm trying. And
Perfect.
Peter Vermeulen, I'm very, very happy to welcome you today to the show, Bravos, the podcast. Peter, you're the second guest of the podcast, and I'm extremely happy to speak to you. We've been in connection for quite some time, and you will come to the show of People Not Numbers. But today, I would like you, Peter, to tell us who you are and what's your background. And then I'm curious to directly dive into the things that matter to you when it comes to employee engagement. So, Peter, who are you?
Perfect. Yeah, Joe, thank you. So I'm Peter, right? I am based in Princeton, New Jersey. I'm originally from Belgium, but I moved to the US 21 years ago. I see myself as a global HR leader. I have worked and lived in 5 different countries and was very fortunate to work close to 20 years for Johnson & Johnson as a head of HR for a couple of businesses. And then I moved to Seattle to work for Amazon, which is a whole roller coaster. And I supported the global support teams in customer service and customer excellence, which was phenomenal experience. And then I became the head of HR in a cybersecurity company called Telesign in LA. And then we were going IPO, that didn't work out. I basically decided 2 years ago to come back to the East Coast and settle myself as an executive coach and as an HR advisor for companies. So that's a little bit in a nutshell. To a 7-year-old, Joe, I like to basically explain myself a little bit as a football coach, somebody who assembles the team, assesses the talent, who is going to do what, and make sure they play nicely together and they're a winning team, you know? So that's basically how I see myself.
You know, I love the analogy that you do with the sports because this is how I love to explain the way I'm coaching. You know that in coaching, there is a dogma that says that you never should give an advice. I tend to respectfully disagree with this approach because when you're a sports coach, it's a mix of asking questions and letting the person find their solution, and also sometimes sharing experiences, which is what I find the most efficient. So it's amazing that you're taking this analogy. And Pete, the first question I would like to ask you, as you know, a partner at the Bravos, and you know how committed we are to work on employee engagement. There is something that is a bit changing in the landscape when it comes to the traditional engagement, I would say, as we think about it. And there is something that doesn't really work. It's usually used as a gimmick or something that really isn't taken truly profoundly or seriously. Can you tell us your point of view about this and where we should start going?
Yeah, there are 2 things that come to mind, Joe. One is wellness becomes more important. And there's a connection between engagement and wellness that we have to think more holistically about. So I've been reading that 48% of Gen Zers today have signs of burnout. 48%, which is tremendous. This could be, I think this is a statistic in the US, but think about it, 48%. So there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. You know, we can go into that. But companies are now basically saying, okay, wellness becomes more and more important. And it is closely connected with employee engagement. And we have to see it holistically in how we manage it. And the second thing that I was going to say is that what I think is most important is we live in a world where data is more and more available. I don't see a lot of companies really making decisions and roadmaps based on data that is available. Customer surveys, yes, but maybe some organizations do them every 2 years and it feels outdated before you even start working on them. So I have seen best practices like Amazon, where we had a daily engagement survey and you were able to turn that into actionable items as a manager, which was so powerful. So I think that the use of data now, the rise of wellness, burnout issues, holistic approaches are more and more important.
Let's dig into the first of the topics, which is this shift from traditional engagement to holistic well-being. What's the difference and why?
Yeah, so as I was saying, basically there is a rise of people that are completely stressed out and there's a lot of things that are going on. If you think about economic uncertainty, for instance, layoffs everywhere. In tech in the US, I can tell you the Googles, the Microsoft, the Amazon, major layoffs, but also aviation. Boeing is laying, I think, off more than 100,000 people. Car industry, we're talking about Ford and Nissan, massive layoffs. There's a lot of uncertainty. So that is one. The second thing that I'm noticing also with my clients, I have 3 clients where basically this is a hot topic right now, is the return to office policy. A couple of years ago, we went to fully remote. People were hired in a fully remote situation. And now, like for instance, at Amazon, they've been asked to go back 5 days a week. 5 days a week.
Five.
Not even, yeah,
Okay.
Amazon is, as of January, people have to come back 5 days in the office. You can question whether or not that is the right thing, but and again, every business is different. But if you take away that flexibility from people, that causes a lot of stress. And then thirdly, I see on the rise is that inability to unplug from technology. It's always being available. Um, and then last but not least, it's the pressure of learning and advancing in your career. And there's so much information around you. You have to learn, you have to always, you know, taking a new job, a cross-functional job, an international assignment, becoming a larger manager, it's a risky business. So all of these things basically are on the rise, and there's a lot of stress in the workplace, and companies do not always basically address that well. So um, they don't have the right strategy in place. They don't have the right culture in place. I would also say they don't have the right managers trained to do that, or the managers don't always have the capabilities in addressing it. So it becomes like a big gap. And if people are stressed out, they're simply not engaged, Joe. You know
And,
that.
and so what there is really one theme out of the 4 things that you noticed and that you mentioned, which is the remote work and the fact that some people were hired remotely and are
Yeah.
asked to go to the office. So that's one. The second thing is you mentioned flexibility, meaning that you seem to imply that a mix of both could be good, not just remote or not just the office. Is that right?
Well, I would basically say every business is different. I have supported businesses that are fully remote and are very working well. They're working well. They
With
deliver
engaged employees, how do they do that?
very
How
engaged.
does that work?
Well, they're able to, for instance, they have certain techniques in place to engage their people. For instance, the onboarding is face to face. They meet all the executives. They really invest time in it, and they invest regularly in kind of get-togethers. But in the meantime, they basically set smart goals for for their employees, and they're basically holding them accountable regardless on if they're in the office or not. And so for some businesses, a fully remote um, type of environment works well. If they are able to hold people accountable, if they're able to kind of create on a regular basis
Yeah, there is an
meaningful,
investment. There is an
there is
investment there.
there is an
Okay.
investment. And then for some other organizations, And I see the majority of companies moving to a kind of a 3 days type of where they basically say, yes, we need the flexibility, but there's also benefit for us coming together because this is where the innovation happens. This is where people can, work with each other in a collaborative way. Not that you cannot do it remotely, but basically it gets intensified.
Mm.
And then you have other organizations like Amazon who basically says now we need to do 5 days a week. Um, SpaceX and X are also basically pushing to a fully uh, a work environment where you have to be in the office. So it depends business to business, but I would basically say one size probably doesn't fit all.
Mm.
Really depends on what kind of business you are, what kind of skill sets do you employ, how do you have to attract and retain your business. Um, so it really depends.
And if I read a bit between the lines of what you're saying, it's not just regardless of what you're going to do, fully in presence, fully remote, hybrid formula, just engaging people is not enough. Paying attention to their well-being. I'm not saying their happiness, huh? Their well-being holistically, not just checking that they have the right level of energy to do their task and they are fully, so let's do a lunch and motivate them from short term to short term. There is something much bigger than that that we need to consider.
Absolutely. So with as I was just telling you, 48% of Gen Zers kind of stressed out. There's something we need to do. And
Mm.
there's a couple of things that I've seen best practices,
Yeah.
Uh, and first of all, before we go to the best practices, I think the first best practice is to start with data. It's to start with data. What are your KPIs telling you? Are you doing, and I'm not saying we should do another survey, Joe. That's not what I'm saying. A survey
Mm.
definitely could be a good input, but there are other tools in collecting data. Let me give you two that I found very useful that I have used many times. Um, some focus groups, for instance, where you facilitate some focus groups around and you have people come prepared with some and you create a psychological safe environment where it is okay to speak up and you get a ton of great information out of these. And I think it is, in my opinion, it is sometimes much better than just a survey you send out. So that is one.
Can I
The
ask
other
why? Is it because you can dig deeper and you can elaborate more?
You can elaborate. You said, help me to understand. What do you mean? With a survey, it's a question. People say yes, no. Sometimes there's an open comment. You don't get always the comments you need. And then you have to kind of guess. What happens a lot with surveys is that you have to do some focus groups after the survey to understand the survey results. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And so why not do some focus group in the beginning that are well designed and well facilitated and where you create the psychological safety for people to speak up freely. So that is one. The other thing that a lot of companies are not using, and I love it, I was able to lead D&I initiatives at Johnson and Johnson, and I have seen the power of employee resource groups.
What is
Uh,
it?
Employee resource group, or in some companies, they call it affinity groups. It's basically groups where minorities come together and support each other in different ways, support each other and support the business. So, for instance, the African Americans in the US, or the Latinos, or the LGBT community, or women leadership, which is very active globally. And so people then come together and basically support each other in their personnel development, but also basically it's a great sounding board to help the organization think through how can we create a more inclusive culture. I have seen ERGs work so well in some companies, and so they're excellent sounding boards, Joe, just to get information to also help you to monitor the environment, to give you real data in a non-filtered way that you could use to create meaningful actions in your organization.
Are there some pitfalls, for example, in the employee resource groups? I have listened to a few people in companies of the size of Amazon, in these big ones, where the feeling was that it was pushed to a point where the differences were more highlighted than just the added value of understanding the diversity of needs of different people. Have you come across that excess, I would say, where in fact, instead of understanding the differences between people in order to serve them better, it became much more of a divisive type of stuff where in fact it slowed down every type of decision making, or it curbed, I would say, the level of engagement because people felt that, okay, this person is in this committee because of belonging of a certain minority or belonging to a certain type or whatever it is. Have you come across that in your
Yeah,
career?
yeah, it is very rare, Joe, to be honest. I have seen some companies where they were really able to work collaboratively with ERGs, and I've seen the power. Let me give you an example.
Mm,
At Johnson and Johnson, we had an ERG with African American talents. And we as a business, orthopedics business, for instance, had an issue in basically getting the African American community to do a hip or a knee replacement. And we basically worked collaboratively with the ERG to get us to tap into their families and their network to get some unfiltered marketing data that will help us to unlock the resistance that African Americans have toward orthopedic surgery. And
okay.
it unlocked more than $10 million basically in additional revenue as a result of it. I have seen American Express as a great example where they leveraged the LGTB affinity group in growing their business in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, and California. How do we do that? But what I have seen is that ERGs are in kind of all stages
Yeah.
and can be a very immature stage to the examples that I gave you, a very mature state. I think what I have seen as a difference is that you need to have a good DNI office that basically helps them to coach them and help them in coming up with a charter. What are you going to focus on?
Yeah.
And leadership invested in the ERGs, mentoring, sponsoring them, visible in the ERGs. So it is connected to your business.
If I tell you, Pete, authentic connections in that context, what can you tell me about this?
Yeah. When I think about authentic connections, I think first of, how leaders can, first of all, display a more active listening mindset. This is really interesting. Um, and so authentic conversations start by practicing, in my opinion, first of all, practicing active listening skills. You know what, Joe? I basically reflect on myself. I thought I was a good listener in the past. And then I started to realize that I was listening with the intent to reply
Mm,
versus with the intent to understand. It's really two different things. And I started to practice more listening skills with the intent to understand. And so, back to your question, when you have an authentic conversation, you practice more listening skills with the intent to understand. So, you display as a leader or a listener an open mindset. You don't have your agenda, you're curious, and
mm,
you have a little bit of a coaching mentality. You've got a set of great questions you can ask um, to really have an authentic conversation. Ask open-ended questions for you to seek to understand and have that open mindset. What I
mm,
have seen, you know, with leaders, sometimes they have a prefixed idea. Like for instance, this person has to be promoted to this role.
mm.
This person may not want to be promoted. There's so much stress in my life right now. I don't want to be promoted. So be open to challenge yourself in terms of like, let's first listen, seek to understand, and then basically ask good coaching questions, and then basically decide how are we going to go from here. That is basically what authentic listening is all about, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I was linking this to the ERG, the employee resource groups that because you were mentioning in the D&I, diversity and inclusion. All of this can truly be uh, valuable if there is an authentic connection between
Yes,
these groups and the leaders of the company. Because if there is not an authentic connection, it becomes something quite transactional, some kind of a tick the box. Whereas if you want to really give results, interesting results, and add value, an authentic connection is required. And in the few minutes that we have, Pete, we discussed before a few steps that companies could take, either to shift from this traditional engagement to a holistic well-being approach, or to also help people build a culture of authentic connection. So, could you share with us what really you think are the steps that companies can start taking to achieve these two goals?
absolutely. So the first thing that I think about is going back to what I just said, start with data. Start with good data. What's the problem you're trying to solve in your company? It's a question we asked all the time in Amazon in meetings. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Great question. What is the data telling you? How do you turn the data into insights? So leverage your ERGs, as we just talked about, have the net promoter score maybe in your engagement survey, do some focus groups. All of that is important. Exit interviews, what are you doing with that information? So you've got all the data, burnout rates, absenteeism, you've got all of that. And then you turn it into an actionable plan that is going to have an impact in your organization. Sometimes I see that a lot of HR organizations and basically would run initiatives for the sake of running initiatives, but it's not connected to the problem they're trying to solve. It's not always connected to the data. So start with the data. What is the data telling you? Come up with a 3-year plan, because you cannot do it all in 1 year. What are you going to do in year 1, year 2, year 3? And basically make sure that you align your stakeholders in the company and your organization about what is it you're going to do this year and what are you not going to do. And next year you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that. I call it the road to the sun.
Mm.
Um, so that is one. Data-driven decision-making, roadmap. You cannot do it everything the first year. Another thing that I would recommend is try to think about, doing small things in the culture that are going to be meaningful for people. Like when I was the head of HR in the cybersecurity company, we had disconnect weeks.
Mm.
So it was simple things that you could put in place that are really going to make a difference. Again, start with the data, but if the data is telling you this could be a meaningful initiative, do that. Deloitte has that too. They have disconnect days, and it works really well for them. But also think about leadership. How can your leadership lead the way and set an examples? If your leaders basically, I'm working with a client right now in the entertainment business, and as a leader, he basically wants his entire team to chime in on a Sunday to create a report in the evening that needs to be sent to the CEO on Monday morning. The stress he creates in the organization by just doing this, it's just, and so it's all about leadership in a way, setting the examples, leading the way. And to be honest, I think there's a great opportunity in um, investing in your leaders, in being better coaches, better listeners, um, displaying that curiosity, having the great questions to ask as a coach to their teams. I think these are important skill sets that I
Mm.
think more and more is an important thing. Does
And
that resonate?
Yeah. I mean, entirely. And to conclude on this, when I'm listening to you, it really feels that engagement is not about productivity. Huh?
Mhm.
And if I quote you in our exchanges before this podcast, it's really to create an ecosystem where employees can thrive. And all the things that you mentioned are not just about people delivering a more productive job. It's much more than that. It's can we create a context in which if people want to, they can thrive.
Yes, absolutely.
Pete, a word of conclusion for people who are listening to us. What would you like to tell them before we finish this little conversation?
Yeah, I want to basically say three things, Joe. One is, um, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Work from the data, turn that into actionable action items. That is number one. And don't try to do it everything in 1 year. How do that in a phased approach and align your stakeholders on that multi-year approach. So that is number one. Two, invest in your leaders. Make sure you have the right leaders in place, invest in them. It could be coaching, but let them develop new skills that they need to be successful. And the third thing is have a good assessment on your current culture. Are there things that you could change, quick things that you could do to immediately make a change? Like the disconnect days, I think is a great example. Uh, PepsiCo has the power of pause, 15 minutes that they use during the day, during stressful moments, and leaders basically embrace that. These are great things that you could do, simple things to alleviate stress in the workplace and thus increase the engagement. So these are my three things, Joe.
I love it. Start with the data, invest in your leaders, and do small things in your culture that will allow you to move step by step. And not everything is going to happen the first year. That's really good. Peter, it was fun for me to be with you. Sorry, the phone is I just turned on my phone and it goes all directions. Peter, I really loved our conversation. I loved your point of view on employee engagement. I can't wait to have you on People Not Numbers to discuss more in depth. I want to know more about you and what drove you and what drives you today and what led you to this path. And I'm sure that the audience will be inspired by this. I leave you with this, Peter. I wish you a fabulous day on the East Coast. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you, Peter.
Same to you, Joe. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye, Pete. You're still here. You made it. Thank you for tuning in to the entire episode. If you liked today's conversation, here is what you need to do: subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, and connect with us. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and on our website, bravos.ae. This is BRAVOS.ae. Your engagement drives us to uncover more incredible stories and bring meaningful change. I appreciate your time, and I'm sending you good vibes wherever you are in this world. Stay engaged.